Hello class, I will be presenting the history of North Korea. The history of North Korea began in 1945 at the end of World War II, after they had been under the Japanese Empire since 1910. The defeated Japanese will lead to the division of Korea at the 38th parallel. The United States would occupy the south while the Soviet Union would occupy the north. Both the Soviet Union and the United States would not come to an agreement on a way to unify the country, and in 1948 they would go on to establish two separate governments, the Western Aligned Republic of Korea and the Soviet Aligned Democratic People's Republic of Korea. During this time, we would see the rise of Supreme Leader Kim Il-sung, who would lead Korea until his death in 1994. This is a war that would not end with a peace treaty, but an armistice to cease fire, a war that till this day is still going on with the division known as the Demilitarized Zone. Korea was under the Japanese rule from 1910 until the end of World War II. Japan developed steel mills, manufacturing plants, hydroelectric dams, and mines in northern Korea and neighboring Manchuria. Due to the rugged terrain in northern Korea, 65% was heavy industrial and 37% of it was agriculture. The Koreans during these times would form guerrillas to stand up to the Japanese, and it was there where the leader stood out, and that was the communist Kim Il-sung. In the 19th century, Korea had little to no exposure to the Western world, but one thing that they did take up from the Western world was due to all the missionaries arriving was the religion from Christianity. Pyongyang and northwest of Korea had a stronghold on the religion. In February 1945, at the Yalta Conference, the Soviet Union would go on to promise to join its allies in the Pacific War, and within 3 months they would declare victory in Europe. The Soviet Union would go on to declare war on Japan on August 8, 1945. During this war, the United States will go on to become extremely anxious for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was advancing at a very fast pace throughout Korea, therefore making US think that they would occupy the entire Korea. The United States will go on to propose the 38th parallel as a divisor between the North and the South, which to the US would occupy the South and the Soviet Union would occupy the North. The United States would take control of Seoul, the capital of the South, while the Soviet Union would take Pyongyang, the capital of the North. This agreement would put 9 million Koreans in the Soviet power, while 16 million in the US power. Kim Il-sung will be introduced to the people of Korea as a guerrilla hero on October 1941. The United States and Soviet Union agreed for a trusteeship over Korea for the next 5 years leading up to its independence on December 1945. Kim went on to establish the Korean People's Army and aligned with communists. He had soldiers that had been part of the guerrillas against the Japanese and former soldiers who had already been in the war, therefore making his army a strong one. Joseph Stalin would provide Korean People's Army with small arms, modern tanks, artillery, and trucks, and Kim would get the support from the Soviets to start an air force. Negotiations between the US and the Soviets would take a stall and make no progress, therefore leaving the United States no option but to go to the United Nations in September 1947. They would go on to establish the United Nations Temporary Commission in Korea in order to be able to hold the elections in Korea. On April 1948, committees from both South and North would meet in the conference that would produce no results. The United Nations Assembly accepted and declared the Republic of Korea as the only government in Korea on December 12, 1948. By 1949, Kim saw no advancement from either side and sought the support from Chinese and Soviets in order to take the country back. The United States withdrew from South Korean country on June 1949, therefore leaving it vulnerable and defended by an inexperienced and weak South Korean army. While the South was extremely weak, the North had nothing but experienced soldiers, and the Soviet had passed down weapons left over from World War II. At first, Stalin was opposed to the North invading the South, but after the People's Republic of China informed him that the North could count with soldiers from their army, Stalin approved the invasion of the 38th parallel. The Korean War, 1950 through 1953. Prior to the invasion of South and North, there had been confrontation on the 38th parallel that had cost both sides hundreds of lives. June 25, 1950, after a strong attack from the North, they would go on to capture the capital of Seoul. The North Koreans would go on to overwhelm the South and allied U.S. troops and would force them to a defensive line in the southeast Korea known as the Pusan Perimeter. This invasion will be condemned by the United Nations and approved an American-led intervention to help and defend the South. General Douglas MacArthur from the United States and the United Nations forces would land at Incheon, where they would retake the southern capital of Seoul. The Chinese forces entered the war in November and pushed back the United Nations and the United States troops. They would retake Pyongyang in December 1950 and Seoul in January. The war would rage on for the next couple of years with millions of deaths, and leading neither side to surrender, it would become a stalemate. Americans would drop bombs in heavily populated areas and would destroy the areas with dikes and dams. The bombings from the U.S. would cause major destruction to the north and would cause devastating floods. The U.S. destroyed almost every building in the north, and after the Chinese and northern government believed the U.S. was planning to use biological weapons, they started construction of hospitals, factories, homes, and schools all underground. With Korea now devastated, armistice negotiations began in July 1951, an armistice that would not be signed until July 27, 1953. Although ceasefire was signed, a peace treaty never was. After the agreement of the armistice negotiations, all prisoners of war would get the option to repatriate, and both sides would make an attempt to persuade its prisoners whether they chose to or not. The Chinese launched a major attack against the South as a sort of punishment for refusing to release prisoners of war after they chose to repatriate. 600,000 Chinese military members died, nearly 37,000 Americans, at least 1 million South Korean civilians, 7,000 South Korean military members, 406,000 North Korean soldiers, and 600,000 civilians from North Korea died. Kim Il-sung died of a heart attack on July 8, 1994, where his son, Kim Jong-il, will come into power. Although not yet signed, it is expected for a peace treaty to be signed by both Koreas in the near future, nearly 70 years after the war started. These are my sources cited. Thank you for listening to my presentation.